My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm a realtor in South Central Alaska, and my mission is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching you in real estate. And to help you accomplish that today, what I'm going to do is give you a market update for what's going on in the residential properties across the entire state of Alaska, looking at the biggest market centers at Anchorage, the MatSu Valley, Fairbanks, and Kenai. So I'm going to give you kind of an update for what's going on in each one of those, and then give you a summary for what's going on really across the entire state for the past year, and kind of give some predictions at the end for what I expect to see moving forward. Before we get started, as always, you know what to do. Give this video a like, do subscribe, because it ensures that you receive more information like this in the future to help you make decisions. And without further ado, let's go and jump into today's market update for the entire state of Alaska throughout the entire year of 2021. First market we're going to look at is Anchorage, and what we see over here is the inventory for the month of December last year was 357. This year it was 222 properties that were on the market. So huge decrease in the number of properties that are available. So that's number one. The next thing we want to look at is the number of properties that have actually sold in this market during the time period we're looking at. So what we see is that the number of properties didn't change too much in the month of December. Last year in 2022 in December, we saw there was about 315 properties that sold. This year it was about 305. So you start to see kind of that gap narrowing a little bit as we move along here. I also want to point out the total number of properties across the entire year went from about 3,200 properties that sold in Anchorage, or the entirety of the municipality of Anchorage, and it increased to about 3,600 the next year in 2021. So that is significant. We'll talk more about that in the summary though. Next, what we see is the average sold price went from about $397,000 in 2020, and this year to date, which the entire year is done. So for the entire year, the average sold price in Anchorage is about $424,000, which gives it a 6.98% increase year over date. And the year before that was about 5.5, somewhere in there. So definitely seen an increase in the average sold price in the municipality of Anchorage. The next market we want to look at is the municipality of Anchorage. We're not seeing a whole lot of change here as far as the inventory goes. It was about 280 in December this time last year, and now it's roughly about 260. So a little less in inventory, not as much as you would see with other markets though. The next thing we see is that the number of properties that actually sold is more or less stayed the same. It was about 201, if I recall correctly, in December. Now we're seeing it's about 215, somewhere in there. So seeing a little bit of an increase in the number of properties that have actually sold, not too much though. Now for the properties total that sold throughout the year in the MatSu Valley is about 2,135 that sold. And now in the year of 2021, we see that the number of properties that sold was actually about 2,375. So we do see an uptick and the number of overall properties throughout the year that did sell. The next thing we want to look at is going to be the average sold price, which I'm sure is the real reason that everybody tunes in anyway. So average sold price in the MatSu Valley went from 301,000 in the year 2020 for the entire year, ending this year at 347,000 approximately, which does mean that the average sold price in the MatSu Valley increased by 15.58%. So pretty sizable increase there. We'll talk more about it in the summary. All right, halftime break here. For those of you who've been watching for a while, you know that I do have a seller's guide for folks that are considering getting their home on the market. This obviously remains a pretty strong market to be selling. We'll talk more about what we expect in the summary, but for those of you considering getting your home on the market and taking advantage of this, do make sure to reach out to me on through either Instagram, Facebook, slide into my DMs. My phone number is down below as well, and ask for a copy of the seller's guide to start giving you some ideas for what you need to do to get your home ready for the market. Now, let's go and finish today's market update and talk about what we can expect moving forward. Now for Fairbanks. Fairbanks is such a small market, it's kind of tough to do a really good market analysis on it just because it's much easier to have statistics and to be able to predict things if we have a larger sample size. But with Fairbanks, it's just not a big market. But we're going to dive into it anyway. The total number of properties on the market in Fairbanks like everywhere else, did take a hit and decrease year over date. In December, this time last year, there were 54. Now there are 32 for the entire market in Fairbanks. Now, the number of properties that actually sold in Fairbanks is actually decreased from what we saw in previous years. Because this time last year, there were about 38 properties that sold. Now for December this past year, it was about 20. So that's something. It's kind of the opposite trend for what we've seen in other places where inventory was low and yet the number of sold properties actually increased or maintained about where it was the year before. But in Fairbanks, we're not seeing that trend. For the entire year in Fairbanks, there were about 379 properties that sold. This year, it was 300 even. So we're seeing a big cut in the number of properties that have actually sold in Fairbanks. And let's go and check out and see how that's affected the average sold price. Now, the average sold price went from $251,000 this time last year to date, so the entire year. And this year, it went to about $281,000. So it's seen a pretty sizable increase. That's a 14.11% increase year over date. So even with there being less properties that sold, and obviously inventory is pretty low, we are still seeing that the number of the average sold price has increased in Fairbanks for sure. Last but not least, let's take a look at the Kenai Peninsula. First off, for the number of properties on the market, we're seeing that there was about 260 properties that were on the market this time last year in December. Now there's about 170. So as everywhere else, we're seeing a decrease in inventory. Also, the total number of properties that sold in the Kenai Peninsula did increase though. So we see that there was about 868 properties that sold overall for the entire Kenai Peninsula last year. This year, it was 1,076. So we are still seeing a definite increase in the overall number of properties that did sell on the Kenai Peninsula, despite the inventory being lower. The next thing that we're going to discuss is what's going on in the average sold price. It went from about $275,000 year to date for the entire year last year in the Kenai Peninsula, and now it's $310,000, which means that there is a 12.88% increase for the average sold price for properties on the Kenai Peninsula. Well, let's jump into the summary here for the entire year. Now, looking first off at Anchorage, the trend stays pretty consistent here. Inventory is low, and it's kind of in proportion to what we saw from the year before. I'm not seeing a whole lot of movement one way or the other. We are starting to see signs that the market is probably evening out a little bit. I'm seeing a lot of the big results that we're seeing with the sold units and the prices was really in the springtime. So there's about 2 months that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the year in the past market here. So that's number one. We are seeing that sold units are up, inventory is down, average sold price is up. It's going to be the highest average sold price in the area, so there's not going to be as much movement as we would see with the other markets. The MatSu Valley was interesting because it did see the highest increase for the average sold price increase. I think it was about 15.5%. And that's pretty sizable. Reason for that is it's right next door to Anchorage, and a lot of people who are working in Anchorage would be okay commuting from the MatSu Valley if it means that they're going to be paying way less for housing, which is what a lot of people do. So that's why the average sold price increased so much over there. I would also add the total number of properties that were on the market. We saw an increase in that until about August, and then it's started to go back down just because of the seasonal changes. I am seeing it's kind of staying in lockstep with what we see for the rest of the really for the what we saw in the previous year. For Fairbanks, it is all over the place. And what I would say as far as Fairbanks go, it's certainly going to be a good time to sell. It's really going to come down to what demand is there. I know they're expanding the base over there, so that's definitely going to have an impact on the immediate market. Moving forward, as far as the real estate market goes, it's all going to come down to the demand at this point. Last but not least, on the Kenai Peninsula, the thing that stands out to me is that we are starting to see a closing of the gap in the number of properties that have actually sold in that market. And that is significant, because once it starts leveling out, then we're going to start having a little bit more of a smoother market here. Across the board for all the markets, though, what we can expect moving forward is as long as the interest rates are low, there's going to be a high demand. Now, interest rates are going to start going up in the near future, and as soon as that does happen, it's going to start dampening down the demand a little bit. And honestly, I hope that happens. I do work with a number of sellers, but this is not good for a market long term. This is exactly how we got into the mess in 2009, because a lot of people are going in and overpaying for properties where it cannot be supported by what we're seeing in the comps. And this is a huge source of frustration for me, because it's actually a violation of the Realtor Code of Ethics to go in there and put properties on the market where you're obviously $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 over its market value. And the issue we run into there is people buy it, and then the market cools off a little bit, and then you go to sell it a couple years later, and it's not that your house lost value, it's that it never had the value you paid for it to begin with, and now suddenly you're in the hole about $30,000. And this is exactly what happened in 2009. And that's why I get so irritated when I see properties that are so overpriced, and I might just start naming and shaming people, honestly. I'm going to give a couple of predictions moving forward. Like I said, we are seeing inventory is going to probably remain low. As soon as the interest rates start going up, it becomes a little easier for people who are wanting to sell their house to find another house. As soon as that happens, we turn that corner, then inventory is going to start coming back up pretty quickly, I believe. So that's kind of my prediction moving forward. I'm going to go ahead and give kind of some advice for both buyers and sellers. So on the buying side, use the low interest rates while we can here. As frustrating as it is to see the prices just shooting up as much as it has, and it's nowhere near what we see in places in the lower 48, but for us, it's still shooting up. The interest rates are really where the deal is going to be made right now. So do the math and don't go, okay, well, I'm going to wait till, the market collapses and then I'm going to jump into it. There's no market collapse. Okay. The only way the real estate market collapses right now, from what I can see, is if the entire economic system collapses. And at that point, real estate is just going to be one of the sectors that are impacted. So I sure hope this market update was useful for the entire year. It's anyone's guess what's going to happen moving forward, but those are just my hypotheses for what's going to happen moving forward. I definitely could be wrong, but I sure hope it comes from a place of at least using the data that we have available to us. As always, if you do have any questions, reach out to me on my Facebook page, Instagram, website. If you'd like to have a copy of my relocation guide, do reach out to me on my website and just put relocation guide in the comment section. But other than that, hope you had a great New Year's. Enjoy your 2022, and let's get after it.